Please welcome the moderator for this session, Chris Voll, the Director of AgStar for the United States Environmental Protection Agency.
Good morning. Glad to see a growing number of faces in the room here. A few minutes ago, I thought we were going to have 3 or 4 folks, so thank you for showing up early. I guess there was a good party last night, so I expect it to be a little bit thin, but glad to see all of you here with us. Let me first just invite my fellow panelists here to come up and join, and then we'll get started with the program. First, I'd like to introduce David Newman. David is the president of the World Biogas Association. And next, Patrick Surfass. Patrick is the executive director of the American Biogas Council. I'm not going to read full bios on these gentlemen. I'll let them do a brief introduction of themselves when they come up to speak. Also, I know there are full bios on the SWANA website. First thing, just from an administrative perspective, when we get to the Q&A session later, we're going to be using this program called Slido. And if you have a question for the speaker, you go to Slido, which is slido.com, and enter event code hashtag ISWA 2017. And that's how we will receive your questions and be able to answer them. It's great to be here with you all. What we're going to try to do this morning is present some information on the biogas opportunity across the globe. I'm going to go first and take about 10 minutes. Talk a bit about the Global Methane Initiative, and then give just a few slides on some of the things happening in the U.S. David is then going to cover kind of the big picture from a global perspective, and then Patrick, again, bring it down a little bit to some of the things happening in the U.S. That are also applicable across the globe. Just from a personal perspective, I've been in this field for about 30 years now. Started with SWANA back in 1986 and worked for the organization for 13 years. So SWANA and WASTECON have a place near and dear to my heart for certain. So with that, let me go ahead and get started with some of the slides here. So I'm here representing both the US EPA and the AgStar program, but also the Global Methane Initiative. And GMI, as I'm going to refer to them from here on, is the sponsor of this session. And I'm going to tell you a bit about that effort. I think we all know why methane matters. It has more recently gotten more attention across the globe. We tend to talk about carbon dioxide as our primary greenhouse gas. The great thing about methane is that it's an energy source. And we're going to spend a good amount of time here in the next hour talking about trying to mitigate methane, but also capture the energy value of it. I think most of you probably know many of the benefits, just from a greenhouse gas perspective, but also economic growth. I just came in last night from Denver. We were having a workshop with the natural gas industry talking about renewable natural gas, and not only the environmental and climate benefit that can bring, but also from an economic perspective, how that can be a new value chain for the natural gas industry. GMI targets a number of different sectors. The ones that we're more focused on today are the biogas sectors, which is agriculture and manure management, municipal solid waste, and wastewater. We also cover oil and gas and coal, but we're not going to spend too much time, or we're going to spend zero time on that today. GMI currently comprises 43 countries across the globe, make up about 70% of the man-made emissions are incorporated in those 43 countries. We also have a project network. The project network is private companies, non-governmental organizations, universities, and we have upwards of 1,000 of those organizations that are part of the Global Methane Initiative. And I invite anyone in the room that would like to join that network. It's free and easy to do on the GMI website. We've done a lot of different activities. I'm not going to bore you with too much on GMI, but we have done a lot over the last 13 years in this partnership. We do a lot of capacity building, training, development of tools and resources, and just trying to enable methane capture and use across the globe. Specifically, there's a Biogas Subcommittee. We're going to be meeting later on this afternoon. If anybody is interested in joining us, that's going to be from 1 to 5 o'clock in room 305 here in the Convention Center. Anybody's willing to come and sit and listen to that meeting if they would like to. You can see some of the areas that we try to work on. Obviously, as kind of the waste management paradigm across the globe is starting to change, lines are getting blurred between the management of organics, manure, and other things, wastewater, and all those lines begin to blur in the across the biogas spectrum. So co-digestion of organic waste in wastewater plants, at manure digesters. Obviously, the issue of food waste, which I know David will cover a bit more in depth here shortly. All of these lines are blurring, but the common thread through all of it is that these organic materials, when they break down, produce biogas. I think I've covered that primarily. Here's just a graphic that kind of illustrates what I just mentioned. Obviously, this one tends to focus on anaerobic digestion. The reason I'm not talking about things like composting or aerobic treatment is that they don't produce any biogas. So in this context of biogas, anaerobic digestion is the technology of choice for a lot of these organic waste streams. And, you know, we've traditionally had biogas uses that people are very familiar with, like electricity and the production of thermal energy, but we're also seeing the emergence of vehicle fuel and biogas as a feedstock for other materials. All right, I'm going to make sure I keep to my 10 minutes here. I'm just going to quickly give you some things to think about that are happening here in the United States. I mentioned before renewable natural gas, otherwise known as biomethane. We are starting to see a very, very sharp growth in the use of biogas-based renewable natural gas as a vehicle fuel. I put the little notice there about BP because they have become a large entrant now into the renewable natural gas field when they bought clean energy renewable fuels recently. You can see the steady growth of the millions of ethanol gallon equivalents that are now making their way into the vehicle fuel market here in the United States. This renewable natural gas is coming from a number of different sources. Landfill gas still dominates that, and we're seeing incredible growth there with a lot of room still for upside growth. But we're also seeing people in the agriculture sector starting to feed that industry. This happens to be a project at a hog manure farm out in Missouri, actually a series of them. Ultimately, 90 of those lagoons, which you see in the left-hand picture there, will be covered, and all that gas is going to be upgraded, put in the pipeline, and sold to Duke Energy for at least a portion of it for green electricity production to meet some of their RPS standards. We're seeing a strong growth in on-site organic management and food waste recovery. These are some systems that are put in the back of restaurants or grocery stores, etc., sports venues, where organic and food waste are being handled separately, collected, and then delivered to anaerobic digester projects. I mentioned co-digestion. You see in the picture on the right, those trucks are coming in. This is a project out in Indiana at which takes manure from 4 different dairy farms, but also from about a dozen different food waste sources. So we're seeing a growth of this kind of a project here in the U.S., and these are often third-party owned projects. The wastewater sector is starting to see themselves as something more than just what their core mission still is to take in dirty water and produce clean water. But they're also seeing themselves more from a sustainability perspective. And we have several different projects where food and other organics are being delivered and deposited in biodigesters at wastewater facilities. I mentioned third-party owned, operated models. I think in certain sectors this is going to be very important, following on the landfill gas model that we have here in the U.S., where the vast majority of those projects are third-party owned and operated. We're seeing a growing market for tangential benefits like eco products from manure, soil amendments, products like cow pots that you see there. People are becoming very strategic and innovative in terms of how to utilize those digestate materials. And this one I have to show, I got a chance to visit Italy. This is the most gorgeous anaerobic digester projects I've ever seen in my life. All the tanks are painted, as you can see, and they take the manure, mix it with clay, and produce a product called Merdicata, which you can see my coffee mug there in the picture on the right. So if you ever get a chance to go to Italy, try to get there. It's the Museo della Marda. I'm not going to translate that. For any of you that know Italian or have some, maybe some language ability, you probably can translate that for yourself. But it's quite a spectacular place. Some of the things that, getting back to the GMI Biogas Subcommittee, that we're going to focus on are listed here. These are things that are challenges all across the globe, and again, we'll be discussing some of these later on in terms of what our committee is going to focus on right now. I'll just let you read some of these. I like to try to set some aspirational goals, and I think if we do that, we're going to see even more growth in biogas across the globe. So with that, I think I only went over by a few seconds. I'm going to end there. We're going to save our questions for the end. And with that, I'm going to ask David to come up and give kind of a high-level perspective. Again, David heads up the fairly newly formed World Biogas Association, but also had played a leadership role with ISWA in the past, if you didn't know that. So, David?
Thanks, Chris. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. And we've been formed about a year now. We're the new boys on the block, but many of you know that we've been in the sustainability in the waste sector for many, many years. And like Attilio sitting here, I was president of ISWA for the last 4 years. And really, we're trying to do the same sort of stuff that we did with the waste sector when we started out about 10 years ago, and that is to raise the level of attention internationally about this sector. If you go and take any one of the international reports on renewable energy or sustainability, there's pages and pages about solar energy, about wind power, about hydroelectric power, and then down at the bottom there's a little footnote that says, oh yeah, there's some biogas going on as well. Well, we want to raise the attention, and why do we want to raise the attention? I'll come to that in a few minutes. Chris has already gone through the reasons why biogas is good for the environment, good for the planet, good for your cities. I won't repeat that. The message about biogas is getting across. Friends of mine, AccuCom is a research institute in the UK, did me a couple of graphs here, and you can see from these graphs how over the last couple of years the industry has grown. Landfill gas has grown slightly, but the anaerobic digestion has grown quite considerably. And if we look around at the types of projects which are being invested in globally, you can see, and I don't have my glasses on, but I think I remember that sewage and wastewater is by far the biggest sector. Why? Well, because Wastewater plants, wastewater investments are already very, very high. They're in situ. It's very easy to take the gas from them. They don't have to go out and collect any materials. They don't have a shortage of feedstock supply. They have homogeneous feedstock supplies. They have it all in one place. Very, very easy to bolt on anaerobic digestion systems, biogas systems to those facilities, and that is happening around the world. But you can also see, I think, yes, organic, so food waste investments, animal waste, etc., etc. And that trend, these are graphs from the last 2 years, but that trend is an upward trend of the last 5 years or so. Chris showed a slide, what does biogas mean? This is how we try to describe it, and we look at all the various benefits that it has. The digester basically is turning out nutrients, digestate, it's turning out transport fuel, it's turning out gas which is going into producing electricity. Sooner or later it's going to be start to be used for, for chemicals. You're going to start seeing biogas plants becoming real biorefineries where they will start to produce a series of materials, soil, nutrients, biogas, heat, and chemicals. That is already happening on a small scale, but the first investments are there. There's so many biogenic waste feedstocks out there to capture. It's actually quite amazing. It's billions of tons. And food waste, of course, is the central focus for many of the people in the cities, because food waste is in the cities rather than agricultural waste. Agricultural waste tends to be dealt with within a natural environment in many places still, especially in developing countries. But food waste has been the focus, and sewage, as I said, is the focus of the big utility companies. But a whole new series of feedstocks are coming into the industry as the industry develops technologically. So we're seeing the demand for treatment of palm oil waste in Southeast Asia. We're seeing in Central and Southern America the adaptation of the use of prickly pears. Whoever would have thought that a prickly pear could give you biogas, but there you go. And the first investments and the first scale up of the use of seaweed as a biogas feedstock as well, particularly in the North Sea. And of course the traditional ones there of crops, energy crops and livestock manure have been around now for some time. Coming back to the food waste, if food waste were a country, it would be the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. We are using a land area the size of China every year to produce food which we're throwing away. So it's quite a significant problem. And this really fits in with the whole question and the whole concept of the global accords on climate change. Why is food waste so important? Why is biogas so important in this? Because by 2020, those countries, America accepted, who have signed up to the Paris Climate Change Accord, will need to develop their NDCs, their nationally determined commitments. In other words, show the Climate Change Secretariat how they are going to achieve the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And food waste is really a very, very low-hanging fruit. I know the history of the development of this industry in Italy, where I worked many years, and I'm seeing the history of the development of the industry in the UK over the last 10 years. And in both countries, it's quite staggering that the waste industry has actually contributed almost 1/5 of all the reductions in greenhouse gases which those countries have made from 1990 to 2010. 1/5. The biggest single contributor, more than transport and just as much as renewable energy. And so if we can harness the energy from that food waste and those other biogenic wastes, not only can we build an industry, not only can we give renewable energy, not only can we give nutrients back to the soil, but we have huge and easily achievable savings in greenhouse gas emissions. Well, that's what you get when you don't do it. And unfortunately, in 70% of the world, this is what you're still getting. Open dumping, food waste thrown into a dump, it catches fire. And we have health problems, we have diseases, we have short-lived climate pollutants going into the atmosphere, and it's a story that you all know very well. And the second focus of biowaste, and the second focus of our association, is to link this into the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of you will know there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which again, countries have signed up in 2015 to achieving by 2030. By 2020, they also have to deliver to the United Nations Secretariat their plans on how they're going to achieve sustainable development and how they're going to achieve these goals, to cut poverty, to cut food hunger, to increase the qualities of the waters and the soils and the air we breathe, and to take action on climate change. And countries all the way through the world are working out now what these Sustainable Development Goals are going to look like in terms of their own metrics. Some countries will be able to do some things and other countries other things, but everyone has to go in the same direction of achieving these 30 goals. And biogas fits perfectly into them. I think we said 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are answered partially or wholly by the adoption of biogas technologies in those countries. But of course, it's all not easy. Were it easy, I probably wouldn't be here. And one of the big challenges, and I know Patrick's going to talk about this in the context of the United States as well, is, of course, low energy prices. And if you make the case for biogas simply on the kilowatt hour of gas and energy that you're going to sell at the end of it, well, in many, many countries around the world, you're never going to install one biogas plant at all. You have to look at the bigger picture of climate change, sustainable development, soils, air quality, health, etc. I don't think many people could have stood on this stage 5 years ago and predicted that in the last 19 months, solar, wind power, onshore wind, offshore wind would have fallen by 50, 60% in less than 2 years, and still falling. And so, as Bloomberg said, the adoption also of battery technologies is going to drive the adoption of those types of energy. So biogas, of course, faces that question. Wherever you go, administrators will say to you, it's great, David, we love it. But at the end of the day, I've got a kilowatt hour of energy that I've got at 3 times the price of this. How can I justify it to my taxpayers? How can I justify it to my citizens? How can I ask them to subsidize this? You have to look at the bigger picture. And what we're seeing in some of the very most developed countries is that food waste levels are actually beginning to decline. They're beginning to decline because a whole series of prevention measures are beginning to bite in. Countries like France and Italy, for example, have made it law that food waste at the end of the day at a supermarket or shop must be given away for free to a charity. It cannot be thrown away, unless, of course, it's rotten. But it must be given away. And we're seeing rapidly declining levels of food waste in some urban centres in the most advanced economies. Also, people's food habits are changing. They don't go to a market, they don't come home with a big bag of vegetables and cut them up. They buy a little packet in a plastic box, throw the plastic box away, eat the content, there's no food waste. Now, we're working on a project in the European Union, I'm part of that project, about taking urban bio-waste and transforming it into plastic. And at an experimental level, you can do this. We'll see whether at big scale one can. So I asked myself the question, people in the food waste industry should be asking the question, maybe we're actually sitting on a very valuable feedstock which goes beyond biogas. We can actually, in the future, perhaps produce materials out of all that food waste. And that's an interesting development, which we'll see how it goes over the next 10 years. That's the project. And the questions that you are going to ask us and that we need to answer as a panel, and I've put them in your mouth, here they are, I'm suggesting them so I know what the answers are, is all about the energy pricing nexus. We don't have in our waste systems, we don't have the pricing in of the externalities, we don't have a carbon price which can make the cost of extraction of raw materials higher than the use of secondary raw materials. How do we organize the collection of food waste? Which methodology do we use for treating? And so on and so on and so on. And these are the questions which we face as an association every time we go in front of policymakers around the world, and which I'm sure we can discuss now in our panel. Thank you.
Can I just go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, David. Next up, as I mentioned earlier, we have Patrick Surface, Patrick is the Executive Director of the American Biogas Council. I actually had the pleasure of serving on the board of that organization with Patrick for a couple of years. They have filled an incredibly valuable role here in the United States, and I'm sure Patrick will give you a little bit of background on ABC. Patrick?
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you all for coming today. And thank you to David as well for your presentation, and also I serve on the board of the World Biogas Association. I'm very happy to do that. It's a great organization. And one of the things that's been really enlightening for me to be involved in working with David is how much climate change, which you talked a lot about, is a major driver around the world, but it's not here in a lot of places. At least it's not with our federal government. And so we're constantly butting heads because as we talk about, okay, how globally can we increase the use of biogas and elevate the market, a lot of the things that we're trying to promote with the World Biogas Association has to do with, okay, how are we going to help our climate? How are we going to be environmentally responsible? And since the last 10 months or so, 11 months, those messages don't resonate with at least half of our elected officials, a little bit more than that. And so we've had to shift our messaging to points that everyone can resonate with in order to be able to grow the biogas market in the U.S., which is my main job, grow as the American Biogas Council. So the good news is that there's lots of benefits, as you know, there's lots of benefits for developing the biogas industry. And so it's very easy to just kind of put those climate benefits secondary for when we're talking to our policymakers and lead with economic benefits and things like that. So because of that, I'm going to focus mostly on industry and project growth in Europe and then in the US. So the American Biogas Council is the voice of the biogas industry, the entire biogas industry in the US. There are a couple other groups that cover different segments. We cover the entire biogas industry, and we're the only trade association who does. You'll notice that there are a lot of companies here that are international, are very prominent in Europe, but a lot of American companies as well. The biogas industry is very, very local, something that you'll see when I show you some data on some of the European countries. When you're developing a biogas project, you're usually not importing very much technology. Maybe you buy an engine or you buy a mixer or something like that from overseas, but it's basically bricks and mortar and steel and things like that that you're making locally or bringing in locally. And that means that the companies in the industry in any one country generally reflect the businesses that are there. So here's my version of the same slide that you've seen. I'll skip over this. The reason why you see all of us have these slides is because education and awareness about what a biogas system is and what it can do is the main thing that we need to accomplish anywhere in order to get the things done that we want to do to grow the industry. So we always have our graphics on this is what a biogas system is, but that's already been covered. So I'm going to cover a couple definitions here, which is really important because I'm going to focus on RNG or biomethane. We call it RNG in the US. In Europe, they mostly use the term biomethane. And I'm going to talk to you about that market in Europe and then in the US. And the other two main markets that I'm not going to cover today, and I'm just going to tell you why right now, is the Chp market. And David alluded to this. The low energy prices for electricity in the US especially, but compared to the price of natural gas in other countries, has created a transition from talking about developing projects for biogas to make electricity to biogas to make RNG. The Chp market and the electricity market for biogas is still very much alive and thriving, but a lot of the interest in growing the industry is in RNG because those markets are in general much less developed anywhere you look, and so there's a real focus there right now, especially in the US. I'm not going to focus on digestate today just because of time, but it's really, really important in the US. Digestate is the liquids and solids that come out of your digester, and right now we need to make sure that they are not a cost to the system. And if they're not a cost to the system, that means we need to be able to sell them. And if we need to sell them, we need to convince folks that digestate has a lot of great nutritional value as a soil amendment. And so that's a big challenge for us. So here's a few definitions and then some pretty pictures that show you what RNG is. So we're talking about filling vehicles or putting gas into the pipeline, usually eventually for vehicular use. Raw digester gas, the gas that comes right out of the digester, is biogas. But if you take gas right out of the landfill, we also call that biogas, or more specifically landfill gas or LFG. If you upgrade that gas to pipeline quality, that's when you call it RNG. So RNG means pipeline quality biogas. You've taken out some of the constituents, and it's molecularly equivalent to fossil natural gas, but it's been made renewably. In the US, we use RNG mostly for vehicles because of the Renewable Fuel Standard, which is a policy I'll tell you a little bit about. And in Europe, they also use RNG for vehicles, but especially in Germany and some other markets that have a lot of renewable energy, especially variable renewable energy like solar and wind, you can put RNG into the pipeline, and then that renewable gas is available on demand for natural gas plants to be able to fill the variability gaps with those renewables. So here's a little bit on the European market. This is the current number of systems in every country. And you can see that the leading countries are Germany, Italy, France, Switzerland, Czech Republic, and the UK. What you might not be able to see is that Germany, which is the first one listed there, there's a little gap at the top there. There's a little break up there because this chart only goes up to 1,800, but Germany's at over 10,000 systems. Germany is just way out in front of every other country around the world in terms of commercial biogas systems. When you look in Africa and India and China, they have millions of home and very small style biogas systems, and the WBA covers that part of it as well. But when we look at commercial biogas systems, Germany is the clear leader in terms of actual projects installed in Europe. So here's RNG projects. Now, if you remember, the first two countries here for total biogas systems, just to go back, are Germany, Italy, and France. The first three countries for RNG in Europe are Germany, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. And so you can tell that for RNG, policies and market conditions in those different countries can change how much the RNG is developing in those countries quite a bit. Germany is still a leader, and at about 185 systems, it's a very small proportion of the over 10,000 systems that they have, of the biogas systems overall that they have installed in the country. Sweden's doing a lot to promote vehicular use of RNG. The town where Absolute vodka is made is almost totally fossil fuel free because of its use of RNG and other renewable energy. And the UK is doing a lot too, something that David can certainly speak a lot more about than I can. So here's a little bit about RNG growth in Europe. So here you have your existing systems in green, and then the growth in blue. And you can see across all of Europe, there's significant growth and there's growing growth for RNG projects across the continent. And then when you break that up and look at that country by country, this is just that RNG growth, but now broken up by the first couple countries here. We've got France, Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK. So you've got the first three there for our total RNG projects, and then you've also got a few other countries. And you can see that over time, from 2011 to 2015, which is what each one of these are, it's 2011 to 2015, and France, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK, you can see each one of those markets is growing, some a little bit more than others, but the RNG market is alive and well, country by country. So I'm going to give you a little snapshot into the American market as well as it relates to RNG. And this is a little bit of a busy graph here, but I'm going to walk you through it, and you can really get the entire snapshot of where we are in the US right now and what the potential is here. So currently, totally, for operational biogas systems, we have over 2,000 biogas systems in the US today. The large majority of those is almost 1,300 biogas systems at water treatment facilities. Both Chris and David pointed out to you that there's a lot of investment in our wastewater infrastructure, and that's a large reason that not only are biogas systems installed at those facilities because they can really help to reduce costs and from the energy and also handle the material that our water treatment facilities are required to handle. But they also represent already installed infrastructure, and so they're an easy target to add a biogas system to as well, to be able to handle more material, create more renewable energy, and reduce costs for ratepayers who have to buy the water that we all use. There are about 250 on-farm systems. I think actually probably that number's a little bit higher today than it was a couple months ago. We've got 39 food scrap projects and 645 landfill gas projects. So 2,000 operational biogas systems. But the potential in the US is almost 14,000 new systems. And that's very conservative because that only counts for farms that only counts dairy and swine. It does not count chicken or turkey farms. And it only counts the water treatment facilities that are larger than 1 million gallons per day. And it only counts probably about, I would say, 40% of the food scraps that actually exist, just to be extra conservative. And even being that conservative, there's still 14,000 new systems that can be built. And if you just look at each one of them from top to bottom here, the existing and the potential, you can see there's a big gap in each one of these. Every one of these markets, there's a growth potential here. And right now, a lot of that growth is focused on renewable natural gas, because if you're selling your biogas from a biogas system, you can get a lot of money for selling it as vehicle fuel, your biogas. You cannot get very much money for selling it as electricity because of our cheap natural gas that we have here. So Chris showed you a bar graph that's of the same data here. This is the use of RNG for up to 2016 and then projected for 2017 and 18. The use of RNG as a vehicle fuel in the U.S. according to the Renewable Fuel Standard. And for those of you who are familiar with the Renewable Fuel Standard, this is just D3 RINs. This does not count D5 RINs, but D5 is a very small amount, and so it would be overshadowed by this anyway. And you can see there's really, really strong growth here. And the reason for that growth in the U.S. Is largely because of the revenue that you can generate. So with the Renewable Fuel Standard, if you're sending your biogas to vehicle fuel, not only can you sell the gas itself, but you can also sell a credit associated with it. And both of those have value. So if you just sell the gas, fossil natural gas, the Henry Hub price for natural gas is super cheap in the US, about $3 a million BTUs. But if you sell that same amount of gas as a D3 RIN, you can sell those credits associated with that same million BTUs for $40. That's a game changer. Even if you get D5 RINs, which are the lesser valuable of the two categories of biogas-related RINs, you can still generate an extra almost $15 per million BTUs compared to the $3 for selling the gas itself. So as you might imagine, if you're a biogas developer and you might be offered from the utility 3 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour, which is the lowest that some of the utilities are offering today, compared to 5 or 6 years ago when you could get 7 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. There are a few places in the U.S. where they have special programs, and you can actually get up to 19 cents. But most places in the U.S., you can only get offered about 3 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. That is just pennies compared to what you can get by participating in the RFS. So this is my last slide, and I'm hoping that it might even serve as a transition here into some discussions. One of the things that David finished with are the questions that we need to ask to be able to promote the biogas industry and grow the biogas industry. This is a different look at the future. These are the challenges that stand in the way of biogas development, as reported by 2 presenters that I was with in Germany earlier this year. One of the nice things about running a national biogas association is that when we get together internationally, we all compare notes. Because like I said earlier, the biogas industry in the U.S. reflects U.S. market conditions, and in many ways it is completely different than even the UK, which in many ways is similar to the U.S. compared to other countries in Europe. But the biogas markets are completely different. Germany, Poland, Sweden, all of those markets have a couple similarities here and there, but they're just very, very different because they're different policies and different market conditions and different drivers in each one of those countries. And so when you look at the challenges, and I just picked 3 countries here because it's the information that I had handy, and one of them is the UK, which is where David lives, and I know he's familiar, so I welcome him to jump in on any of this. But if you look at all these challenges, first look at how many common challenges there are between those 3 countries. There's almost none. And so when one of the gentlemen from I think it was Frank Hoffman from the German Biogas Association presented on the top challenges, those are the ones that he listed that are in the German column. And he also presented on the challenges in the UK there, which is why I offered David to challenge me if any of those might be wrong. And then the US challenges as relate to RNG, I've listed there as well. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them here and want to point out a couple things here. So tariff reductions is one of the things that seems to be common in the UK. The reason, or in Europe, the reason why that's not an issue here is because we don't have those benefits here in the US. So it's not something that really stands in our way because it's not something that we have. It would be nice if we had some things, some tariffs that would help to support growth of the biogas industry in the US. Market uncertainty is the one common theme across the industries. Anything that we can do to create stable, long-term policy so that if you are a business person trying to develop a project, you know what policies you can use, and your investors know that those policies are going to be there in 2 to 3 years, the time that it takes you to develop a project. Consistent policy and stable markets in everything that we do is key anywhere we are. Competition from wind and solar industries. We don't have that in the US. We have competition for biogas to electricity with wind and solar in the US, which is why there's an asterisk there. But in the UK and possibly in the UK, that's a challenge there as well as waste feedstock availability, pipeline capacity, and gas interconnection costs. Gas interconnection costs are also a big problem in the US. It's one thing that we share with the UK. Gas utilities in the US, if you look at the next three there, gas interconnection costs, permission to get into the pipeline, and different gas interconnection standards, that's for the quality of the gas. Those are three gas utility-related issues. Unfortunately, I can only count about 4 utilities of well over 100 that are very helpful in working with biogas project developers in the US. The gas utilities is a sector that we need to be working a lot better with. We need a little bit more leniency from the gas utilities. I think the gas utilities need a little bit more data from us, but that's a big challenge in the US and especially for RNG to get into the pipeline. Finally, federal policy. We have the RFS, for example, is potentially very helpful as we discussed, but once you get into the weeds, there are some real challenges there for actually using it that we need to resolve with one of our federal agencies. Finally, there's no credit for renewable heat. In the US, that means if you take your biogas and you create electricity from it, you can get a credit. If you create vehicle fuel from your biogas, you can get a credit. If you create heat, there's no credit. We should have a policy in the US for renewable heat, and that's something that we share with Germany. And then finally, low CNG vehicle sales. The more vehicles that we have in here or Germany, that would really help grow growth. And then an interesting one here that I was kind of surprised to see in the top 5, but it sounds like price signs at fueling stations in Germany is a major challenge. And I think that's just really exemplary of the fact that their market is just so much more mature than a lot of the other markets around the world. Often when you look at Germany and you look at their challenges, you can kind of look into the future a little bit and say, oh, well, what challenges are they dealing with now? Well, we should make sure we avoid those as our industry grows, because we're basically, in some ways, similar industries, but many years behind. So that's my look at RNG challenges going forward. Here's my contact information. I'd love to talk with you. I'm looking forward to having some questions, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick. Really appreciate that overview of not only the U.S. market, but RNG around the world. I mentioned very quickly, but since 4 of Patrick's items at the bottom of his list were RNG and the natural gas utility industry, I just want to address that really quickly. I mentioned earlier that actually I was just in Denver yesterday. And for the first time ever, myself and my counterpart in another program at EPA called Gas Star, which works with the gas utility industry, had a workshop co-located with the American Gas Association at one of their major conferences out in Denver. And we had 75 people in the room. 90% of them were from the natural gas industry. All the topics that you raised, Patrick, were what we talked about through the day.
Good.
So I can say that we are moving in that direction and trying to facilitate that dialogue. And in fact, one of the things that and I'm not going to name names, one of the major Northeast utilities brought up was the whole concept of thermal decarbonization and looking at the heat and that as an opportunity for the natural gas industry to step into. So it's not just about vehicle fuel, as both David and Patrick have said. We have bioproducts. I actually just saw a video from a company in UK, David, talking about producing animal protein for feed from biogas. So I'm glad Patrick kind of pulled us in the RNG direction, because I think that's what's exciting out there right now. Okay, with that, I think we've got, since we started late, I think we've got about 15 minutes or so for some questions, and I do see some that have come in here from the audience. So let me ask real quickly, though, just a couple of quick questions of both David and Patrick. So, David, this is kind of a very big picture question, but how have you seen, if at all, that commodity prices for things like food, petroleum, et cetera, have those had an impact on biogas and on feedstock availability over time?
Yeah, I think that, Shannon, you got a slide there. I think it's really interesting, the whole sustainability question, that there is a myth. There is a myth that we continue to perpetuate, and we're all guilty of it, and that the myth is that there's a huge natural resource scarcity out of there and prices are going through the roof. It's a myth. We have huge volatility, which makes it difficult to manage raw materials and commodity markets, and therefore the supply of those commodities to your businesses. But actually, long term, markets have not priced in any perception whatsoever of scarcity. Now, what this means to our whole argument around sustainability, in my humble opinion, is that when we don't realize this, we hit the barrier of what market reality is, and we don't quite understand it. And the market reality is huge volatility in various times over the last century, but in real terms, trending slightly lower all the time. Now, if we don't understand that, then how can we build our business model, and how can we build our business case around the things that we do? And food, there's another graph I have, but we don't have it here today, because this takes into account food, it takes into account metals, it takes into account many, many raw materials that you can see below there. Food has basically remained a stable price since 1945 to today, increasing more or less just with inflation, at a time when the world's population trebled. Well, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? Population goes up, consumption goes up, people are less hungry, so food prices are going to go up. Actually, they don't. So I want you all to be aware of that and to dispel this myth, because it really, really changes the way in which we think about our businesses.
Great, thanks, David. Patrick, I guess I'm going to ask, so I just brought up the positive aspect of RNG being available for all these different, this big suite. Is there any downside to, promoting all of that and somewhat confusing people in terms of the fact that there's all these opportunities? Is it better to just focus on RNG for vehicle fuel, or is it better to open the whole Pandora's box and say we have all these different opportunities?
Yeah, so this is a great challenge for the industry, because I really believe that the main challenge for the U.S. market, but I also think in most markets around the world, is education. If more folks knew what a biogas system was and what it could do, every industry would be growing faster. And so one of the challenges to education is complexity. And biogas systems can create lots of different products from the gas: electricity, heat, pipeline gas, vehicle fuel, chemicals. That's just the gas. But then you've got liquids and solids too for your digestate. And you can create all kinds of soil products and bedding for animals, and anything that you can really make nitrogen and make from nitrogen and phosphorus. You can create all kinds of different things. You can create flower pots, right? And I think the challenge is, when we're talking to policymakers, we need to make sure that they understand the suite of products and benefits that can come from biogas systems, because no matter where policy goes, we need to be able to make the point that biogas fits in so many different places. There's so many intersecting industries with the biogas industry. We've got agriculture, we've got transportation, we've got solid waste, we've got fertilizer, and the food industry, and the wastewater industry, which brings in municipalities and along with the solid waste as well. And there's so many intersecting industries. Policymakers need to understand all of it. And so I think we need to find a way to communicate all those different products very well. But then when a project developer is actually trying to develop a project, I think the industry needs to be very good at helping the customer find what's best for them and focusing on a very simple message. Hey, look, we know what your electricity prices are in your state. They're super low. We know that there's pipeline access nearby. That means you should go to RNG. Or maybe the opposite's true. Maybe there's a really great electricity policy like there is in Vermont. And so that means that RNG may not be the best move for you there. You should take advantage of that great policy to create electricity. So industry needs to help simplify the message, I think, to customers. But for policy and as an industry, when we're educating the general public, we need to help educate them on all the possibilities.
Great, David.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on that. You asked the question, Patrick, and I was smiling, the differences in policy in the UK. Well, anybody heard of Brexit? Okay, we have a little problem. It's called Brexit. And what that means is the government is completely 100% and 110% concentrated on this absurd process which we have to go through over the next 2 years. And so the renewal, for example, the renewable heat incentive, which was supposed to happen last year when the general election didn't happen and we're still waiting for it. So the industry has stalled because, yes, we do have a renewable heat incentive in the UK, but actually we don't anymore because it's not been renewed. So new investments are not accessing it, and that is because the political process has stalled. I like what you said about making different cases. I was with the London Waste Authority last week, and they are looking at the new waste and resource plan for the whole city of London, 11 million inhabitants over the next 10 years. And so I said to them, it's all about air quality. And they went, what's that got to do with waste? Well, actually, if you take your food waste and you put it in a digester and you make biomethane, you can actually feed 76% of all the heavy goods vehicles running on diesel in the UK. And actually, that's going to really drive down all your particulate matter in your air. And by the way, air levels in the UK, and especially in London, are twice the pollutant levels recommended by the World Health Organization. You've got a problem. Food waste can help solve it. Biomethane can help solve it. And if you look and you make that case, they go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Oh, yeah, I didn't understand that. That's the sort of case we have to make as an industry.
Great. Thank you both. Let's try to get to as many as we can from the audience now. But I just want to echo what both David and Patrick have been saying, is that while the focus of this is biogas, we have to put that in the context of the larger project. It's just imperative to see this industry grow that we do that. So let's try to get to some of these. We've got a question. Extracting biogas from organics is great, but how can we assure the quality of the inputs are sufficient so the digestate doesn't go to disposal? Patrick, do you want to take a quick shot at a quick answer for that one?
Sure. Contamination is the big issue, and you have to take contaminants out. These are things like non-compostable forks, metal products, pieces of glass, stuff like that. And I think you can create a system that will take out any kind of contamination. But those systems that will take out any kind of contamination are very expensive. And so when you're developing a biogas system, the balance that you want to create is what is just the right amount of equipment that I need for the kind of contamination that I'm expecting in my feedstock, so I can keep my capital costs as low as possible, but make sure that none of that material is getting through, because I want to be able to sell the digestate at the very end. And so it's a balancing act. There are technologies that take out the contamination on the front end. There are technologies that take it out of the digestate on the back end. But the key is knowing how much contamination you have going in, which means inspecting your loads going into your facility directly and designing your system for that kind of contamination. And if you get a load that has too much contamination, you just have to send it back, because otherwise then you're not going to be able to sell your digestate and you won't have a good product. And in doing that a couple times, hopefully you teach the folks sending you their organic material that maybe they have to do a little bit on the organics on the waste generation side to help reduce contamination. Maybe if it's coming from a cafeteria, signage needs to be increased or education needs to be increased. And what we've found is that when truck drivers get sent back, and I saw this the last time I was over in the UK for one of the events, when the truck driver comes in and they have to be sent away, they don't want to have to go to the landfill. No one wants to have to go there. The customer doesn't want to have to pay for it, and that education starts to happen.
Great.
Can I pick up on that? The experience in Italy, where I worked for 15 years, and I ran the Biogas and Compost Association there, was that clean feedstocks are essential, and therefore the collection method of food waste has to be spot on. Because people will throw yogurt cups, they will throw batteries, they will throw everything into the same bag if you don't teach them how to do it differently. And I'm very proud that the city of Milan, which is 1.3 million people, now has 100% coverage of all its population, door-to-door, twice weekly food waste collection using compostable bags, over 110 kilos per inhabitant per year intercepted, one of the highest in the world, with 3% contamination. And that's because there is a continual education process, there is the use of the biobags, there are fines and penalties for non-observance, and the quality of the digestate, the quality of the compost they get out of that is extremely high. It has a very high value.
Great. I'm going to try to just answer this one really quickly. What is the trending technology for CO2 removal for RNG? I suggest we don't get into a lot of depth on that right now. There are multiple technologies. There's not one that's necessarily outpacing others. There's membrane technologies, there's pressure swing absorption, there's other things. So if whoever asks that question, if you want more, I'm sure either Patrick or I could help you out later.
Selfishly, I'll just say if you go to the AmericanBiogasCouncil.org, there's a chart there. It's technology agnostic, and it shows you all the different kinds of technologies you can use for siloxane removal, for CO2 removal, things like that. Great tool.
I think this next one we may have just answered. What are the biggest challenges with food scrap to biogas projects? What strategies have been applied to overcome? I think David's last point there, that making sure you address clean feedstocks, although do either of you want to add anything additional to that one?
Contamination's definitely the big one.
Yeah, I think also, the cost of the waste system compared to the alternatives, where landfill is cost zero. What's the case for going and collecting food waste? So in the UK, for example, we have a landfill tax of £85 per tonne, and that drives material to recycling.
We wish we had one of those. I do. Maybe not everyone in this room.
Well, I can send you one.
This one's going to be for Patrick, and I think we have time just for a couple more. EPA does not value biogas as a transportation fuel from food waste. How to change?
So I want to protect Chris here, who works for EPA. The issue that we're talking about here with EPA not valuing biogas from food waste has to do with a certain office in EPA that is not Chris's office. In EPA, it's a regulatory agency, and so there's part of the office that deals with compliance issues, and they're responsible for administering the RFS. Basically, if you make biogas from manure or biosolids, like wastewater biosolids, or from landfill gas, you get that $40 per MMBTU credit that I mentioned earlier. Remember, the gas itself is worth about $3. The credit from those feedstocks is worth $40. Well, the credit from food waste is worth $15. And so if your credit from landfill gas is worth $40 and your credit from food waste is only worth $15, well, doesn't that incentivize landfilling food waste from the EPA? So it gets much more complicated than that. There are reasons for why it is what it is, but we don't like those reasons, and we'd like to have that parity addressed in a way that does not reduce the credit from landfill gas. That credit for landfill gas going to RNG is very, very helpful to the industry. It's very helpful to the country in terms of providing renewable fuel, but we need to make sure that the credit for food waste is increased in a way so that there isn't a financial incentive to landfill food waste, which is essentially what we have with the RFS right now. And that's a staff or administration change that's needed to make that change.
Great. Are we completely out of time, or do we have a couple minutes? Couple minutes? Okay, great. Thanks, Shannon. Why not co-fire biogas with natural gas without CO2 removal? It's cheap and improves total combined cycle turbine efficiency. I think I'm going to try to answer this real quick. As we've been talking about renewable natural gas, upgrading to pipeline quality gives us a lot of flexibility. Once you get it out into the national natural gas grid in whatever country you're in, that allows a lot of flexibility to go in many different directions. Obviously, firing biogas raw to produce electricity on site or in a boiler, that's perfectly fine technology, as Patrick said. But putting it out into the natural gas grid and upgrading it to pipeline quality provides a lot of flexibility.
Now, if you had a biogas system right next to a power plant and you could avoid the upgrade and going to the pipeline, you totally would. But that would require building a biogas system, a large one, or several of them, right next to the power plant so that you could have a dedicated pipeline. Sure. You got to move the gas anywhere. You got to put it in pipeline quality.
It's a question of volume and capacity too, isn't it?
Yeah, yep. Transportation.
And I'm aware of one of those down in Florida where that's exactly what happens. It goes to a combined cycle power plant. Let's see. Let's get one more here.
I like the one about electric vehicles.
What do you want to go for there, David?
Well, in Sweden, we're seeing increasing competition from electric vehicles. What is your view on this challenge? Well, it's not just Sweden, it's the world over. And Mr. Musk is an American, I think, so you know the story.
We have an opportunity in the U.S. for electric vehicles.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and I don't think there's any conflict. I think what we've seen in the UK and what our policy team has taught me, I was ignorant of it, was that, of course, you can't power heavy goods vehicles today with electric batteries. They just won't go very far. You know?
The batteries are very heavy.
Yeah, but I mean, a truck won't run 500 miles across country on a battery, okay? And it probably won't for the next 20 or 30 years. So there's the opportunity there for biogas, certainly in substituting diesel for heavy goods vehicles. Trucks, buses, big pieces of machinery.
In the U.S., I think the market for vehicles is really heavy-duty vehicles for that reason. To make a battery heavy-duty vehicle, you just have to haul lots of batteries around to get that range. Yeah. But on personal vehicles, if we can make the electricity for battery vehicles or the hydrogen for fuel cell electric vehicles, if we can make that from biogas, which we can, sure. And if the Renewable Fuel Standard, another challenge with the Renewable Fuel Standards is it doesn't recognize the ability to do that yet. You can't actually they can't get a project approved right there, right now in the RFS, but it's almost there. If we can do that, then biogas to electric vehicles in the U.S. is actually a significant opportunity.
This was another topic yesterday, and unfortunately, what many people said at our workshop yesterday is that many states get locked in on the electrification pathway and can't see beyond that. So I think we all understand that there is an opportunity for both biogas to play in the heavy-duty vehicle market and electricity to play more on the passenger side, but people get tunnel vision and then can't see the biogas opportunity.
It can serve on both sides.
Right. So with that, I think we are a little past our time, so we're going to have to wrap up. I want to thank Patrick and David again. I apologize. We had 6 additional questions we couldn't get to. I'm sure we'd be happy to answer those if anyone wants to come up. But thank you again for your time and appreciate you all being here this morning. I just want to make another pitch. If you have any interest in the GMI Biogas Subcommittee meeting, we'll be meeting at 1 o'clock in room 305 later on. And thank you again very much for your time.